Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pollock and Thurston. We're not interviewing anybody today. We are just chatting one-on-one as we break down the WWE's first quarter earnings report, and we'll probably get into some Wembley Stadium discussion, and maybe, if there is time, how much does it cost for a city to get the Royal Rumble in 2024? Highest bids, get ready, because your public dollars are bringing the Royal Rumble, potentially to Florida.
Yes. Are you ready to have a robust conversation and give some incremental color to the WWE Q1 earnings report that happened yesterday to really harness the post-wrestling flywheel here? I'm ready to go. I'm excited.
Well, I have the quote of all quotes coming up later from Frank Riddick, as he all but said some heads are going to roll once this merger comes down. But here is the most animated way I can discuss it in terms of making it seem as less violent as it's going to be with a bloodshedding after this merger goes through. But I've got to say, Brandon, that going into this earnings report, with the merger pending, I got to say, I thought this was like a pretty like ho hum Q&A. Like we got a little bit of to me, this was not one of the stellar calls when it came to Nostradamus Nick Khan projecting where all the sports rights were going to go and a lot of big news stories. Although
he didn't break any news, he didn't opine about the media space and the landscape.
This was a very safe call. I have to say, though, for me personally, the most feedback I got was people stunned that WWE writers are not part of the Writers Guild. I was like, did anybody think that this was a thing, that this was a unionized effort that the WWE writers have undergone, that Stephanie McMahon blazed the trail for unionized writers? But it seemed to be a shock that WWE will not be affected by this Writers Guild strike, which I'm glad the question was asked, but I did not expect that kind of feedback from people.
Yeah, it's in one of their disclosures. I've seen it for years where they say none of our employees are represented by a union. And then that would refer to corporate employees. I think writers are employees, but they're not represented by a union. Correct. And nobody who works for WWE talent or employees are represented by a union. So they're in the clear as far as that goes. I did see someone joke that maybe if they had writers who were represented by the WGA, their scripts would be better. Some of the scripted promos wouldn't be what they are.
If there is one person in the wrestling media space that's going to design an AI generated raw script, it's on your shoulders, Brandon. Like this is what the whole the writer's strike, this is a part of what they are concerned about, is looking at these potential problems. I mean, could we get an AI generated WWE program over the next 5 years?
Well, only if Hollywood does that, because I think one of the main functions of the writers system in WWE is to make WWE feel more like it is a major entertainment Hollywood TV show.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the earnings that they did report. They had net income for the quarter of just over $36.6 million with revenue of $297.5 million. And this was essentially a quarter of, this is the difference between comparing to last year, where they had a large-scale international event, and this year not having a large-scale international event. So, Still that titling for Saudi Arabia, but a big difference, roughly $56 million in difference. But nonetheless, this was a quarter that was received very well. And there was a lot for them to pat themselves on the back for this quarter when it looked where live events were just a couple of years ago. And this was looking like a pretty dire sector. And now, something that you've beaten the drum on, Brandon, is, good creative, star creation, and look how it can affect other areas of your business. This would certainly be a lot of evidence towards that this hot swing of television, it has resulted in television viewership being up and people buying a lot more tickets than prior years.
Yeah, I mean, it was to make a minor point first. This quarter was more profitable than my spreadsheet model was calculating, and punching the numbers in on their expenses yesterday when the 10Q finally came out. I think that's due to my not taking into account for the lower expenses that they're having now, because they're doing merchandise through Fanatics for their e-commerce, and now which has not hit the books yet, but they're going to do that for vending merch now soon. So they're saving a lot of expense, and it seems that it's making them more profitable. So that's happening. But yeah, I don't think there can be enough said about this is a really positive consumer metrics time. The years of 2016 to 2019 were not. We saw, decreases in TV ratings, and maybe you can dismiss that somewhat because of cord cutting and people watching TV less. But we're seeing positive trends in TV ratings and positive trends in attendance. And the TV ratings being up, it's kind of like, there's such a headwind with TV ratings in general that maybe flat is good news, but that's not what they've got here. Raw and SmackDown are up year over year. And if you look in the demo, which now they're breaking out the demo, they're putting the demo slide in the KPI slides, which is very exciting. That the younger viewership is up even more strongly. And I've broken out 18 to 34, so the younger half of the demo, and that's up even more strongly. So, and I think that the younger viewership trends really tell you something about sort of the hardcore fan interest or how relevant the show feels. And that's very positive in these year-over-year trends. We've got multiple months in a row where those comparisons, the same month of the prior year, is positive, and that is basically for Raw, where there's been this many months in a row where you could say it's up year over year. That has basically not happened in any significant way since cord cutting really started to be a net negative on linear TV. SmackDown's been all over the place because it's been from Sci-Fi to USA Network to Fox and all that. But so those are all these really external factors. So in my assessment, this is an largely internal reason why these ratings are up, and that's basically not happened, at any time since I've been covering wrestling. And I think there was to me a comedic moment in the call where Stephen Cahall from Wells Fargo, the analyst, asked, Paul, if you could weigh in here, tell us what you're doing differently. And he just sort of, went on and praised everybody. And wow, he's got this, they've assembled the right team, world-class superstars. He praised developmental and the NIL pipeline. Wow, the pipeline's great. The writing team is world-class. Kevin Dunn's team is great. We focused on character development. He did mention Sami Zayn and the Bloodline, which I think is something real and relevant. And they have this, what he called planning the event horizon. And they look year over year. They do long-term planning, which is, it's a new discovery, I think, in wrestling creative, this idea of long-term planning where you actually.
In fact, the night after WrestleMania, someone came down to Seth Rollins while he was in the ring during a commercial break, and they informed him of this long-term plan that they have as they came back from commercial break, and we're letting him know literally on live television this long-term plan.
Yes. I think that there may have been somebody the night after WrestleMania who came in and was experimenting with maybe more, disrupting those long-term plans. But yeah, it's as much as you can say about Vince is more explicitly involved in creative now. The month of April has not resulted in the reversal of these trends that we've been seeing for the last, 6 months or so. Everything's okay still.
And that is extended to ticket sales, the numbers that we have gone over. It is an interesting time now because, despite all of these numbers, they are taking, I would say, like a measured risk at this point by going back to these exclusive rosters. You are separating the belts. You're making some, changes that are going to be impacting the programming. That this has been a winning hand that they have been playing. Now, I don't think that there is going to be some dramatic drop off, even a worst case scenario, but they are certainly changing long-term visions here when it comes to, going back to a presentation of separate rosters that your audience has sort of told you. Seeing the big stars on both shows, it has resulted in both shows being up significantly and having those stories back and forth. I don't know if you would want to be tinkering with what has been a winning formula.
Yeah. Before we started recording here, I did try to dull my Vince McMahon grinding axe, but he's back and he's got to change something that's not broken. And probably the big problem that was happening for these months while he was off was that he was not getting credit for all these improvements in business that were happening. And now at least he can have a hand in it and maybe get some of the credit if these positive trends that we're seeing survive for the months to come.
Yeah. So as Brandon mentioned, they did break down not just viewership increases for Raw and SmackDown, but also now introducing the 18 to 49 numbers. And just looking, I've been looking this month at last year when they were up against the NBA playoffs, and the 18 to 34 numbers are even more impressive when you look at how much they're up. So it's to me, it's like this three-pronged attack. It's like our viewership is up, our demo's up, our younger viewership is up. When, as you mentioned, if they were flat, I think people would take that as a win, given that USA is in less homes from a year ago. Like there's a lot that they can boast about at the moment, and it comes at a pretty. It couldn't be better timing when we can talk about the exclusive negotiating window that could be ending imminently, if not already.
Right. And they compare, here's Raw versus what USA does in prime time. Here's SmackDown versus what Fox does in prime time. And I mean, Fox has a lot more popular shows than USA Network does. So SmackDown doesn't look as great against Fox as Raw does against USA. That said, though, Fox is winning most Friday nights when there's not like a special event like there are NBA playoffs happening right now. Fox is winning Friday nights with it's only 2 hours filled with SmackDown. And that's in the demo primarily. I mean, they're getting beat by like Blue Bloods and stuff like that on CBS. But Fox is
not by Young
demo.
Rock.
No, not by Young Rock either on NBC. But Fox is able to win Friday night because of SmackDown.
Yeah, and you see this comparison of like what Raw brings to the USA Network, like it dwarfs the average. And with SmackDown, like you can certainly see it's kind of in line with what Fox is producing. But the connection for NBC Universal to retain Raw, like you just see how dire USA Network would be without this audience that is 3 times the primetime average. Like it is the diamond of USA Network's programming schedule.
And NXT is right on the average, I think, of what their USA Network number is. And I would wonder if those USA Network numbers include Raw. So I guess if you think about it, like, okay, exclude the WWE stuff, maybe NXT would still be above the average, which what are we talking about at that point? What's USA running on prime time other than WWE? And I think it's like Law and Order reruns and stuff like that.
Which is wild when, I mean, it does not feel all that long ago that USA Network was just this juggernaut, that WWE, it was like they were part of this prestige network, and now they are carrying this thing at this point in time. So that was a big win for this particular quarter. As were live events. Do you want to talk a little bit about the attendance figures? These were up, a 32% increase in total attendance over a year ago, and prices have gone up for your average tickets.
Right. I think the average ticket price was at $75. And think that, well, okay, that includes Royal Rumble. And we know the Royal Rumble average ticket price was like $160, but they reported an average attendance of 7,900, which is up from 5,700 in Q1 of the prior year. And it's important to look at these seasonal comparisons because Q1 tends to be a pretty good quarter for live events because I think it's an indoor winter quarter and you have the run up to WrestleMania happening too. But yeah, it's up, and I went back and looked at everything that since W has been breaking out attendance by domestic North America, which really means US and Canada, and international, which is everything else, and they've been breaking it out like that since 2004, and it's not quite a fair comparison because W has done fewer house shows in the last few years versus what they were doing, say, 2016 or something like that. But this is the highest average for a quarter where you exclude WrestleMania. Got to put in all these caveats, but this is a really high average attendance. Now it's got fewer house shows in it, but just to illustrate, at least within the last, at least certainly since the return to COVID, and I think actually the return to COVID quarter, Q3 2021, that did have like an 8,000. It's not right on here, 8,300 attendance average, and these are all paid numbers that they're reporting, I believe, by the way. So excluding that, this is like the highest average they've ever had. Now it's got a lot fewer house shows than prior eras, so that lifts the average. But just to give you some sense of, they really are doing better than they were in certainly any time since the return to touring, and in a sense, sometimes before the return to touring too, before COVID.
Has any of the performances, especially on the live event section, in terms of observing what's working on television and what the importance level is that you place on live events, people physically going to an event, buying a ticket versus tuning into a show from their home, in terms of like how engaged this viewership is when you are creating these stars and in theory they come to your local market?
Yeah, it's it's making a purchase versus just sitting at home and watching something on TV. It's watching something on TV is a cost of your time, and going to an event is a cost of your time too. But it's a lot of friction to transport yourself down to the arena and pay admission to get in there. And then if the kids are hungry, they want like a $6 popcorn and stuff like that, and the parking too. But I think the Roman Reigns storyline with Sami Zayn has become very strong. I think that has been a major contributor to SmackDown, which its ratings went up first before Raw. Raw was not doing as well, let's say, in the fall through the NFL season. But Raw has really followed since the new year, and that coincides with the return of Cody Rhodes. Cody Rhodes is on a lot of these house shows since he's returned from injury. So those stand out to me as the two biggest factors. And there's maybe external stuff like Peacock being in increasingly more homes and maybe people getting more engaged with WWE as a downstream to Peacock being available in homes perhaps that don't have access to the USA Network or Fox. So that's what I see happening. And just maybe overall, people perceive as anecdotally, it adds up. People perceive the creative to be better in general, along with just the things that Roman Reigns is involved in, the things that Cody Rhodes is involved in, although we know how controversial the finish of WrestleMania's main event was. It's not as if we see evidence that, they've killed Cody. We don't see evidence of that. And we have tickets that were probably bought perhaps in advance of WrestleMania. But we don't see signs that, things have weakened drastically. We don't see signs that people are tuning out of Raw. Raw did an okay number last Monday. And SmackDown for the draft did a really strong number.
Yeah, it's something I have meant to go back and kind of like chart the last couple of months, but the Canadian numbers have been very interesting to watch because they were in the lead up to WrestleMania, like gigantic numbers that they were doing weekly. And since WrestleMania, like they have definitely come down, and it's been several factors. Like the NHL playoffs are massive here. You've also got the Toronto Blue Jays that are a behemoth here in Canada as big factors, but they have really come back down to earth in a big way over this past month that we have not seen conversely in the US as well, whether you are looking at as kind of like an Owens and Zayn factor or just the fact that there is a lot of like big sports that are doing just insane numbers, like well over a million for some of these Leafs games that are happening, which in Canada, like just these are crazy numbers we're talking about.
Yeah. And I guess we should stress that this is, in a business sense, this is the biggest time, not only of the year, but of the last 5 years of this TV rights cycle, because now is it, the window for the exclusive negotiating window where WWE can only talk to NBCU and Fox about Raw and SmackDown. That either ended very recently or it's ending in a couple days or it's ending now. And their ratings doing really well obviously helps them a lot for these US TV rights negotiations that they have to do. And something else that Nick Khan mentioned was the Montreal show coinciding with, they've got to renegotiate Canada rights. So maybe there were Rogers executives or something who were invited to the Montreal show. And LA, WrestleMania being in LA in this entertainment center was positioned or at least helped with WWE's ability to, bring everybody in to let them see and schmooze with them and build relationships perhaps and let them see a huge event. And that's what the UK show in London is about. Not the AEW show, but the Money in the Bank show is about too, because they've got a renew UK deal coming up soon too.
Yeah, so all of the live events, it's just being dictated by Nick Khan's itinerary of who he needs to meet with and piggybacking off these events.
Yeah, I mean, where does WWE get the most of its money from? It's not from fans. It's from business relationships. And ultimately, those businesses have to be supported by fans. But most immediately, it's from TV rights and other kinds of business relationships.
And governments, yes.
Yes, don't forget governments.
The big tent poles. Let's hear from Nick Khan during the earnings call, and this is him talking about the domestic television rights negotiations that are ongoing.
A couple things. We've had productive conversations with both Fox and NBCU. I believe that they're both seeing the product, the growth of the product, the impact of the product in the right way. So we're optimistic about all of that. In terms of the timing on getting a deal done, one thing I've experienced is that during the process of these things, you can control a lot of it. You can never control when it closes or when you get to an agreement. So can't estimate that yet, but we remain bullish on Raw and SmackDown.
Bullish on both. And it was brought up during the Q&A about how long this exclusive negotiating window is. And Nick Khan's response was about a month. So you can take that as 30 days or very close to that number, which he had stated going into WrestleMania weekend was when the exclusive negotiating window was going to begin. So you can do the math. It's, as Brandon said, it's either up or just about to be up. Do you read anything into that this 30 days are up? And do you see WWE exploring the outside offers? Like, it would seem strategic that you would want to go to the market with these rights, but Nick Khan is very much he puts the incumbents, as he puts them, very front and center in terms of giving them every opportunity. And I think that ultimately an NBC Universal deal is expected by everyone, and maybe SmackDown is more your question.
Yeah. And Brandon Ross, the analyst who we talked to a couple of weeks ago, also asked him about whether
many questions.
He asked him whether there was any IOI, which I quickly had to Google, indicators of interest. So he was asking if is there any way for you to measure? Do you know how much interest there is from outside parties other than your incumbents? And he said no. Exclusive means exclusive, for what that's worth. I guess my sense now is that, SmackDown is as you said, is the one question. I very much expect Raw to stay with NBC Universal. And if SmackDown doesn't stay with Fox, well, then where does it go? And I think NBCU starts to stand out to me more so as a potential candidate, as a potential home, more so than Amazon, I guess. WBD I don't think is a realistic outcome, especially with the things we're seeing around AEW and WBD. So like, who does that really leave, other than Amazon and NBCU, which if NBC ends up taking SmackDown, it really raises the question, why did you not just buy that company? But I guess that's moot now. Amazon, and I don't really think there's any real players out there, right? Other than those, as far as making really competitive bids. The other potential players, I guess, would be Paramount, but I don't see any obvious homes there.
You're not a Paramount stockholder, are you, today?
No, I've gotten no. I heard they cut their dividend, right?
Their stock is down, I think, 26% today. It's not a good day for Paramount.
All the content companies have been suffering, I guess, because of this writer's strike. I only hold Apple, Microsoft, and some index funds. So I've mostly disavowed myself or divested myself of these media companies. I don't think Netflix is going to do more live. They had some trouble with their live broadcast recently. Apple's not getting into wrestling. I don't believe that for a second. So it's just NBCU and Amazon that seem to be the other players for SmackDown to me.
I threw this out on Wednesday, and just hearing from a number of industry people that are talking about this writer's strike, many believing this is not going to be something that is settled imminently. This could go into the fall potentially. And if you're one of these broadcasters, and this would apply to AEW, WWE, do you lean more in terms of this is content that we can fill holes with if necessary for certain gaps in our schedule once you're getting to crunch time? Do you see any potential positive effect if you are one of these companies and NBC, they're going to need to fill hours potentially?
I suppose. I mean, it's something you could bring up in negotiations and say, hey, look, we, as Nick said on the call, we've got no writers who are.
We're never going to go on strike. You never have to worry about this.
Of a union or association.
Pandemic. We've got a gym. We'll go through with this. It's honestly it's a cushion for these companies that are like this. The apocalypse could occur, and WWE will get a show on the air on Monday night.
Yeah, and I mean, COVID was proof for that. And neither of them missed a week. But yeah, I guess it helps them with that argument. And maybe there's some openings in the TV schedule that they could be plugged into. I mean, I guess those PLEs could go anywhere if NBC Universal wanted to air them somewhere other than Peacock. And WBD is certainly, if reports are accurate, is about to pick up more hours of AEW.
Every night of the week, AEW.
we're getting close, right? It'll be on 3, and if you insist on watching Ring of Honor, 4.
Just have to come up with more names: Dynamite, Collision, Eruption, Disruption, Breakage. I mean, what other words can we come up with in the that they can expand programming with? In terms of Peacock viewership, and maybe you can talk a little bit about any kind of data you can glean from this, but we got the requisite percentage increases year over year. Royal Rumble up 52% from 2022, Elimination Chamber up 54%, and then WrestleMania 39, they said 39% increase internationally and 29% increase domestically. And in kind of a throwaway comment, Nick Khan mentioning that WrestleMania 39 was watched by 35 million viewers internationally. I think he threw out on this call. I don't know how that number was arrived at. 35 million people. So that's quite a number.
Yeah. We got positive deltas again. We don't know how many viewers that really means. There was an interesting slide that was presented in some sort of committee meeting at the Tourism and Sports Committee meeting in Orlando in Orange County from late March that I came across, which shows some numbers of how many viewers these PLEs got, which it's not clear if these are global numbers or US numbers. I tend to think they're global numbers, or I'm sorry, I tend to think they're US numbers. So over 1 million people watching the biggest WPLEs is what this slide indicates. So, I mean, that's in line with what were the reports on the Rumble this year having almost 2 million viewers. I guess this is believable.
Yeah, I would love the breakdown of the 35 million figure. I mean, that was a very, very large number, but that was on the Peacock front. And I mean, aside from that, when you look at the Q&A portion, let's hear from Frank Riddick. So this is in relation to the pending merger. Actually, let's hear from Nick Khan first, and this is his reaction to the merger and how comfortable they feel with Endeavor. Here, spoiler, they're very excited.
We're all excited about everything that should and will happen together with UFC and with the folks from Endeavor. Keep in mind, we've known these folks for a long period of time, so they're not strangers to us. Their style is not strange to us. It's something that we give a full embrace to, and I can certainly represent, emphatically to you on the creative that there's no one at Endeavor or the UFC that has any interest in trying to interfere with that in any way whatsoever. I think Dana White would also represent to you that never, or almost never, I don't know the specifics, but never would be my guess, has the Endeavor folks told him, no, you should do this match or you should do it this way. That's not what they do. That's not what they say they do. And that's not what they're going to do. All of the other things that we talked about in terms of revenue and continuing to build a business internationally and domestically, we think they're experts at, and we're looking forward to getting into all of that and more once the deal is approved.
Yes, and MMA fans will remember right at the beginning of the pandemic when Dana White was going to buck any commissions and go run a card on at Tachi Palace on an Indian reservation, and that was when allegedly he did get a call from Disney saying, "You are not doing this, Dana," and that would be maybe an instance of Disney getting involved in UFC's live event planning. But yes, for the most part, he believes we will be left to our devices to run our company as it sits presently, and we are used to their style. We are very comfortable with these people.
Right, and what you're talking about sounds like a TV partner going to UFC and saying you're not going to do this, as opposed to Endeavor going to UFC. And
right, it seemed like this came. The reports were that like this came from Disney up top, as opposed to an Endeavor itself call. Right.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if Vince and Dana had a meeting before the Endeavor deal was agreed for Vince to get some advice on whether Dana really does have as much freedom as he wants, maybe to reassure Vince of that he would be able to that W would be able to control creative anyway. Whether or not Vince controls creative, another question. But I think
maybe you can email Vince and ask him about that meeting and how it went with Dana.
There may be a filing that would aid in doing such a thing. And I think that, when we're talking about all these TV deals and just, over the last year, we've been talking about the scandal surrounding Vince, and he went away for 5 months and he came back. And why did he go away? We're not really sure, but he did decide to retire, and was part of it because he believed, or people around him convinced him, that his presence would have a negative impact on WWE's TV rights negotiations. Well, he's back, and is it going to have any negative impact? Nobody in the air thinks, that's not in the air. So it just remains there's a big story around what happened and why all these people left and why Stephanie left and why he left and came back that is very much untold.
Yeah, and it was mentioned in here that this quarter, and this had been disclosed earlier, a $17.4 million payment by Vince McMahon covering certain costs related to the investigation. I was kind of curious if Jeff Shell was going to be brought up in this call, not just the very clear comparison you could make to Vince McMahon, but as well, does this at all, is this someone that is a connection for WWE in these negotiations? Does Jeff Shell, does that impact anything, even in a remote way, for Nick Khan?
Yeah, that would have been a good analyst question. I get the sense that some of these questions, I know it's not a press conference, and their job is to understand the company and make their estimates and all of that. But they seem to like to avoid questions that make people feel uncomfortable or get at anything that approaches the moral. But I don't expect that it does have any difference. W was with NBCU probably well before Jeff Shell was CEO of NBCU. I don't think he was CEO for very long. And I'm sure they'll be around after. And we've kind of already discussed how central and how important W content is to USA Network and to Peacock as well.
So I mentioned Riddick, Frank Riddick here. We're going to hear from him about the potential cost synergies. This was a question about corporate expenses for the company and where the majority of that is fixed.
Yeah, so the corporate expense is the unallocated overhead, but we have other expenses that we consider corporate that are allocated to the business segments, obviously. But it's primarily the cost of the finance, the technology, the data analytics, marketing, and international groups, as well as typical corporate, the executive office. So that's the primary costs that are in the corporate buckets. If you look at it, the main expense we have is that shows up in corporate is people and the compensation cost for people. The cost of running the public company, are not the biggest part of that expense bucket. There are costs like D&O insurance and the cost of the board and the cost of doing SEC filings and things like that. But where there's opportunity, and with respect to the potential for cost synergies, we've independently, not with Endeavor, but ourselves, looked at our costs and the buckets and where there might be opportunities. And we're very comfortable with the $50 to $100 million range that's been articulated, and are starting to think about how to organize to go get those costs once the deal closes.
All right. So you lift up those corporate buckets, Brandon, and there's going to be some spillage from these corporate buckets. And the biggest gain is it's people. We've got a lot of people.
People are expensive.
People are expensive, and we are very comfortable getting to this $50 to $100 million figure that has been thrown out. So that was as dressed up a comment as you're going to get, that they are going to be addressing these corporate buckets in time. Very rare that we have a Frank Riddick quote that we isolate here. It's usually the Nick Khan show here, but this was a rare Frank Riddick appearance on this show.
Yes, it's usually prepared remarks and reciting very, very dry and technical financial bar charts and things like that. But I was thinking about it. They disclosed in their proxy statement the median compensation for a WWE employee was something like $101,000 in 2022. So, if you divide that by $100 million, you've got 1,000 people. And that's more employees than they have. I think they have something like 900 or 800 employees. So it doesn't really set any limit mathematically on how many people could be laid off to me. And as far as any hints that have been given, they're going to protect creative, they're going to protect production, You know, if you're on the road, it sounds like you're probably pretty safe, but not clear anybody else.
Yeah, including free agents. There are
Free
free
agents.
agents coming out of this draft as well. A lot of people, you want to be signed. You want to be signed to Raw or SmackDown after this draft, wouldn't you? Unless you're Brock
Yes.
Lesnar or
Well,
Omos.
but clearly they're use Omos as like that traveling Andre the Giant character.
And just wrapping up just from the rest of the call. Just questions about the exclusive negotiating window that we went over here. Long-term partnerships when it comes to sponsors seems very optimistic that that endeavor is going to help them internationally, continuing to grow sponsorships. And we have seen that being a major growth area. And it sets the stage for what should be a very big second quarter for the company, where you have this, this hot streak that the company is running, a WrestleMania quarter, and a large scale international event coming up at the end of May.
Yeah. And another thing that I've been noticing as I comb through the filings is we've got less insight on merchandise sales than ever. And that was kind of already the case. We kind of already understood that from a couple quarters ago when they started the Fanatics relationship. And that has eliminated their reporting of, they used to report how many units they sold e-commerce on W Shop and maybe some other outlets.
Yeah, none of that this time.
So that's gone. And the venue merch data is gone now too. And I imagine it would have been gone once they started doing venue merch through Fanatics. They announced the deal like a month ago or something like that. But that's all in Q2, I guess. But that's already out of the filings. So we don't know what their venue merch per capita was for Q1, for example.
Those Cody Rhodes weightlifting belts that I saw at Elimination Chamber. I could only imagine what the.
Do they have all the indie companies written on them?
I don't know that, like, there's a second version of those weight belts that could have been sold. Imagine how many potential weightlifters were walking out of SoFi Stadium on both nights of WrestleMania this year. I mean, those things they were selling for like $100 at the Bell Center. Those things,
the weightlifting belts.
Yeah,
is Smash Wrestling getting a royalty for that, and Beyond Wrestling.
If Sebastian Suave didn't get a carve out of the Cody Rhodes merchandise, then I don't know what to say.
Yeah. But the one piece of information that Nick said that was new information to me, and I think it was new information in general, is that he said that WrestleMania did $7 million in venue merch sales. And I did the math to see what is that per capita. And if you look at, I did do the WrestleTix number, not their announced number, and then like knock off 10% of it, and you get to something that's well over a $50 venue merch per capita number. I said, well, maybe he's counting like all the other events. Maybe he's counting SmackDown and Stand and Deliver and Raw. All of that, and even then you're still at like $46 per ticket, per sold ticket, and a lot of those people are repeat customers, right? Because a lot of people are going to both nights of WrestleMania alone, let alone anything else. But that's a lot of merchandise per person, which he said broke the record of the $5.2 million of last year. And we do have the half capacity 2021 WrestleMania, which did $32 venue merch per capita. So that's like almost doubling. It's like times and a half or something like that. So that's a lot of venue merch per capita.
Let's talk a bit about this Royal Rumble bid. So you came across this was a presentation done on March 27th in Orlando, where they are making their pitch, and they are seeking $850,000 bid for the Royal Rumble, and making the argument of what the economic impact will be to the city of Orlando, and using comparisons, Orlando hosting the Royal Rumble or in 2016, and then WrestleMania in 2017, the roller coaster set. And this would be the Rumble at the stadium is it Camping World Stadium that they ran WrestleMania in? So this would be a stadium event next January. And there's a lot of interesting things in here just from the slides, that obviously this bidding group is working in concert with WWE, who are providing this data for them. And certainly
this is where we got the streaming data that I was mentioning earlier too. Is clearly WWE is giving them data to say, go to your government and go to your government officials to see if they'll approve of this. They want this to happen.
Yeah, so it's a high six-figure fee that they are seeking for this, and a lot of breakdowns of their audience, ethnicities that are watching. I think like a 67% male skew, like getting pretty significant in terms of the breakdown that they are getting here. But this is No, we have certainly seen for several of these international events, but now this is becoming what they're looking for. Like as you reported with Backlash and what they're getting for the 2 nights coming up this weekend in Puerto Rico, and it would seem like this is going to be what they're seeking, especially if you can start getting cities in the U.S. on a significant basis. This is obviously a huge amount of revenue if they can get it, and getting public dollars for these events is very interesting that they're navigating this.
Right. So Backlash is this weekend,
Yes.
and they're getting $1.5 million in cash plus a value of an additional $300,000, which I believe is related to the venue and maybe some other things. So essentially $1.8 million in value from the government in Puerto Rico, from the tourism board, and some other organizations in Puerto Rico. They got a subsidy for Clash of the Castle in Cardiff. We don't know how much. And there was a report from a local outlet in Cardiff where the media there asked, and local government would not disclose. I believe it's pretty likely they got some subsidy from San Antonio for this year's Royal Rumble. My public records request that they already gave me some information, lots of information on for the attendance and ticket sales. There's some portion of it that had to go to the Attorney General of Texas or something like that. And I think we're now past the time frame that they told me it would take. I followed up with an email the other day. I haven't gotten a response yet. So I don't know if we'll learn anything from that public records request about the bidding for San Antonio, but it seems that there was some bidding process, and it was being given to the Attorney General to see if they had to disclose it or not, because there was concern that disclosing it would hurt them competitively in future bidding for W events. So anyway, high six figures, Orlando approved of, or Orange County approved of an $850,000 bid. I thought it was interesting that they put one slide on the screen that had the total combined attendances for all these Royal Rumble events, which if you look up, these are the announced attendances, or actually they're maybe slightly different. They're like 100 higher than the announced attendances. Anyway, they're putting all these announced attendances on the screen that are announced attendances that, we know what the San Antonio announced attendance included, and that included the capacity of empty suites, the capacity of an empty press box, the staff, who are all probably local people. And the justification here is that, hey, look, we're bringing a lot of traveling wrestling fans in here who are going to spend money on hotels. They had some people who run hotels come to this meeting too. And that definitely benefits the hotels and the talent and everything. And the out-of-town staff, that makes sense too. They're all spending money on hotels. But they're using an enhanced exaggerated attendance figure here, which I think is questionable at the least.
It's definitely like a great territory you're operating in when you are like seeking like public dollars for these events. But some of the arguments they made is the fact that with the events now on Saturday, their research suggests longer stays in the city for people that are coming out. And I think the number that they threw out was for I can't remember if it was the Rumble in 2016 or the following year's WrestleMania, but nonetheless, it was like a 60% figure that were from outside of Orlando. So kind of arguing the fact that this is not just a local crowd that is showing up, but this is a traveling event, which a Royal Rumble is going to be, not at the scope of WrestleMania, but nonetheless, it's a big event for them to stage. And as we've seen with some of these other events, kind of piggybacking SmackDown on it, where they're trying to make a weekend out of it for people that are coming and make it, 2 nights of revenue for the city.
Yeah, and just to add, and if you want to see these slides, I tweeted the 2 key slides that we're referencing here. They're on my Twitter. We also put on the slides the CPMs, so like the cost per 1,000 viewers during the PLEs, and the Orange County government officials were discussing how that would be a real value to them because it's Orlando, it's a tourism city and all that. And they're so if for fans in Orlando, or maybe considering going to Orlando for Royal Rumble, if it happens in 2024, there were allusions to the possibility of an Amway Center event in conjunction with Royal Rumble at Camping World Stadium. So that would be, I would think, a Raw or a SmackDown or maybe even an NXT event. And there was a really brief reference to Orlando, or maybe I should say Orange County, potentially making a bid for WrestleMania in 2025. So we know Philadelphia is WrestleMania next year. 2025 is not finalized. I've seen reports that maybe Minneapolis is going to get it, which has never had a WrestleMania, but I'm sure there'll be many municipalities bidding for WrestleMania.
And it's worth noting the fact that the UFC, we have seen enter into some of these the same process as well. They've got an agreement to bring shows to Houston on a fairly regular basis. Last summer, they also went to Salt Lake City, which is kind of an out of the way place for a major UFC pay-per-view event. But when there's a site fee, it certainly incentivizes them. So I think with both companies, you're looking at all ways of finding revenue, and if there's a demand for these events, they're going to be able to find this, and it can be very very expensive proposition for some of these cities. But also, I just think this is going to be the way that they're positioning these premium live events as they continue to move forward. But I just was really interested in how much information they're disclosing in these in these meetings, and not surprised that it would make its way to the Wrestlenomics universe.
Yeah, it's just the notion of these site fees is an interesting phenomenon where we're seeing this turn from what seems like an increasingly primitive wrestling business of a few decades ago, where it was about ticket sales, selling things directly to wrestling fans, and it's become more so about upfront guaranteed payments, either from media partners or even governments. And I mean, Saudi Arabia is the biggest one of all by far, which is a totally different story. Just these upfront payments to even now have live events in certain locations.
Last thing before we end off, let's move over to AEW. They had a pretty big week this week, and that's before they have even officially put tickets on sale to the public, and that is the pre-sale numbers for All In that is set for Sunday, August 27th at the Wembley Stadium in London. Over 43,000 tickets sold and a gate of 5.7 million US, according to Tony Khan, with his latest update coming on Thursday evening, after having a spirited, argument with Mike Coppinger online of ESPN, who had stated he had heard that it was scaled for 40 and blowing past that number already. So the on sale date for the public is Friday. So sort of, you can take your guess at what the further demand is going to be for people that did not seek out one of these unique codes that were limited, as I understand it, to AEW Plus subscribers on Fight and those that were customers at Shop AEW. So you had to do some legwork to get this code. And I mean, it's a phenomenal figure before even the public on sale has begun.
Right. I heard you when I listened to Rewind Dynamite this morning. 70,000 you think they can reach?
I think that's within shooting distance. I think that you are going to get another wave on Friday, and I would think conservatively that should take you over 50, which leaves a big gap until 70. But I leave that to be like, how much of a rush is there going to be in those final 6 weeks when you have a card, and how big of an attraction you put on this show? Like, you put, Sting's career at stake. Like, is there something that's going to move people in that way? Or are we going to be limited to the vast majority of tickets being confined to this week?
Yeah, I guess. And I've heard people say that, that the hospitality availability, hotel availability around London may be an issue. So I just don't know about that. But I guess I don't have a great sense of like how many people are going to buy tickets still who didn't get pre-sales. But you're saying that it was limited to people who are AEW Plus or maybe AEW Shop customers. Is that right?
That was my understanding.
Yeah,
and that
I think you're right.
And that these were unique codes too. So it couldn't be a case of where I have a code and I can give it off to you and you use it as well. But yeah, right. that was my understanding. But I don't know the intricacies of these codes that I'm sure people will inform me of. If I'm wrong.
We heard that there were as many as 60,000 pre-sale requests that were
in that neighborhood. Yeah.
So, and we're at 43,000 at this point. I mean, in any case, this is going to be an event that's kind of, a minimum 50,000 people at it, and maybe well above that if they can really fill this stadium. And I think it's really a marketing value that I think has already started to take effect, in that it does feel all of a sudden like I felt like we were in kind of, we did a podcast several weeks ago about the decline in AEW popularity, which we can see demonstrated in a number of metrics. And it feels like it has this event and its ticket sales have shifted the mood around AEW. And this is only the beginning. And another massive piece of it will be when they have this event and you put the camera on a stadium full of people, not for a WWE event in a big stadium, but for an AEW event in a big stadium for the first time. And I think it really raises, some Monday morning quarterbacking about, doing the first show in Canada in the Ricoh Coliseum as opposed to Rogers Center.
Yeah, I can't say that a major pay-per-view at the Rogers Center would do this level of business, but I think 30 would have been a very achievable number for the first time in the market and for one of your major pay-per-views on top of that. And just for the amount of travelers that you would get for that show, I think it was a missed opportunity. I don't know if they could replicate it. I still think there would be as we can see with Forbidden Door, like there was a giant demand for the Scotiabank Center, which is not Rogers Center, but it's not Ricoh either. So,
and it had to be a pay-per-view. Like I don't think they could
Yes.
have done a Dynamite at the Rogers Center.
No, it would have to have been one of your major pay-per-view events. But I would say like there are very encouraging signs from Forbidden Door to this All In event. The natural anticipation that a CM Punk is going to generate, and the eyes that will be on this Saturday night experiment to see how it gets off the ground and the sustainability of a second night of AEW programming. And if they are able to replicate anything approximating Dynamite, if it is in between that and Rampage. But this is obviously a big summer for AEW and where they are come September.
Yeah. So I tend to believe, and I don't have any information about this, but I tend to believe on May 17th, which is the day of the WBD upfronts, we'll probably find out that it's official that AEW Collision is happening. I did try to call United Center this morning, and I asked the guy at the box office if he knew if there was an event on June 17th in United Center. He didn't know anything about it, but he did forward me to somebody, so I left a voicemail. But yeah, I think if assuming, which I believe it's true, that there's going to be an AEW Collision Saturday night show, I guess I was going to, are they going to be, does this mean an increase in fees and compensation for AEW from WBD? I thought certainly when I had the idea that they were going to have to add another weekly night of touring. That doesn't seem to be the case now. Now that we're hearing that Dark and Dark Elevation are going away, that leaves open some space for them to do the normal diet of TV taping that they've been doing, especially if Collision is only a 1 hour show. Then again, if part of the idea here is that, well, we can keep Punk and the EVPs separated, they're still going to be at the same tapings in that case. So I don't know. I'm sure there'll be some live collisions. The first one will be live, I'm sure. And then that's 17th is probably Saturday, so it's that would be live. But anyway, I think it raises the question: once this is announced and official that they have another TV show, you're adding another hour of content on a weekly basis. So maybe this means more money for AEW. And I think it raises the question: okay, is this a renewal or is this an adjustment of the current deal, or what's going on here? And I would think AEW would want to announce that and make a big deal about it if that was the case. So that remains to be seen. And I think whether or not AEW has the option renewed already, I think that's probably the case. Don't know. Tony, I asked Tony, he would not say. But I expect Dynamite and Rampage to be on TV in January, so probably is. But it raises the question whether or not that show is indicative of a new deal already being in place or what's going on there.
And the other one would also be, the potential of a streaming option, like where you are going to be able to watch this All In show that is already being marketed and is legitimately the biggest by far show in company history. And it's a huge show if you were going to launch like a presence on Max or whatever will be.
That would be my prediction, that maybe we learn Collision is a new show and All In will be streaming live on Max.
Well, there you have it on the AEW front, and you're now all caught up on the WWE's business earnings through the end of March 2023. And Brandon, are you back tonight with the Wrestlenomics 30?
No. This is for subscribers. This is your Thursday podcast for the week. But we will be back on Sunday with Chris Gull and Jesse Collins and me for Wrestlenomics Radio, talking about whatever we learned between then and now.
Any early indications of who's gotten out to the lead on the Wrestlenomics draft. That was the real draft of the week, with due respect to the NFL and WWE.
True. I haven't run the numbers since the last couple of days, but I was way ahead. I'm sorry to say, I was way ahead of either Gullah or Jesse at this point, just because I drafted wrestlers who had a higher ELO to begin with than everybody else. But we have a whole 7 or so months before we have to count everything up, I guess.
Well, I got ahead of myself because we have one final business note, and that is that, as announced on Rewind to Dynamite on Sunday, June the 25th, along with the team at Poison Rana, myself and Wei Ting, we are teaming up with Braden Harrington and Davey Portman to present the Forbidden Pour, your official, well, unofficial, pre and post-show party coming up the day of Forbidden Door here in Toronto, Sunday, June the 25th. We are going to be across the street from the Scotiabank Arena. You could not have a closer location unless you were inside the Scotiabank Center. It is going to be a live Q&A hosted by Wei and myself. Doors open at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and you will get the live Q&A, and then we're going to be hanging out with listeners. Then you can walk over, catch Forbidden Door, and then make your way right back to Real Sports for the after party, where Braden and Davey will be hosting wrestling karaoke. And we got off to a very, almost the biggest pre-sale of the entire week, because we put out the first 30 people could get official Post Wrestling 5th anniversary t-shirts. Gone, Brandon, in record fashion. So look at that. Our advance is huge. We were, some people thought we were going to be like scaled for 20. We exceeded those numbers. So hoping that Brandon Thurston might even make a cameo if we can lock you down with a site fee.
Right. Well, we'll discuss that. But I think it just demonstrates just how strong the Post Wrestling flywheel is for both Post Wrestling listeners, the audience, and for all of its business partners.
Yeah, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to all of our corporate buckets for helping us promote this. Postwrestling.com/live. $30 gets you your all-day ticket to the pre and post-show party, the Forbidden Pour. So check out patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. And this Sunday, they will be back, Brandon, Jesse, and Chris, breaking down all of the stories going on in professional wrestling and the fallout from Backlash. I want a deep dive into Bad Bunny's San Juan street fight with Damian Priest.
Okay, we'll be there.
Yeah. Okay. So look forward to that, and more to come. We might have an interview coming your way next week. We have been in touch with a power player out there, but plenty of people that we have on our expanding double secret spreadsheet. So you can check all of that out. Thanks to everyone for joining us live, and that will wrap things up. Thank you.